Just who was Allen Ginsberg, and what influence did he have on American culture? Allen Ginsberg was an American poet who was highly influential and a leading figure in the Beat Generation. So, the Beat Generation was basically the precursor to the hippie movement of the 1960s or the countercultural uprise of the 1960s. So, the Beat Generation, they were literary and cultural figures that began after World War II and lasted through the 50s and the 60s. The Beats rejected traditional values and embraced freedom of expression, experimentation, and spiritual exploration. Other noteworthy Beat Generation figures were writers like Jack Kerouac with his seminal masterpiece On the Road, William S. Burroughs, another poet writer, and the Beat Generation, they rejected the mainstream values of the time, which were very straight and narrow, embracing spontaneity and sought to explore alternative lifestyles and spiritualities. Allen Ginsberg himself was an outspoken critic of political and social injustices, including the Vietnam War, and his work often was seen as activism, so advocating for free expression, LGBTQ rights, and anti-establishment sentiments. He was one of the first real champions for, well, I guess it wasn't the LGBTQ community at the time, because it was much more loose than that, but he himself was an openly gay man and very much proud of that and trying to create a future in which people could express themselves and express their sexuality fully, even if it was rejected by the culture at the time. And Ginsberg's most famous work is, of course, Howl. Howl is a groundbreaking poem written in 1955 and published in 1956. Howl emerged during a time of post-war conformity in America, and it captured all the disillusionment of a generation struggling against societal norms and the pressures of industrialization. It's one of the seminal works of the Beat Generation, along with Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and it's very freeform. So in traditional prose, it just breaks it's stream of consciousness writing. So it's all just emotion, and it's all just all the suppressed constraints that Ginsberg and his friends were feeling. These countercultural beat figures. He captures it in this poem, and it's a powerful, moving, beautiful, horrifying. It's all the things, and it's one of the greatest works of the 20th century. So I'm going to read that. I'm going to read Howl for you here. And without any further ado, here's Howl for Carl Solomon by Allen Ginsberg. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix, angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed sat up high, smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats floating across the tops of cities contemplating jazz, who bared their brains to heaven under the L and saw Mohammedan angels staggering on tenement roofs, illuminated, who passed through universities with radiant cool eyes, hallucinating Arkansas and Blake Light tragedy among the scholars of war, who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull, who cowered in unshaven rooms in underwear, burning their money in wastebaskets and listening to the terror through the wall, who got busted in their pubic beards returning through Laredo with a belt of marijuana for New York, who ate fire in paint hotels or drank turpentine in Paradise Alley death, or purgatoried their torsos night after night with dreams, with drugs, with waking nightmares, alcohol and cock and endless balls, incomparable blind streets of shuddering cloud and lightning in the mind leaping toward poles of Canada and Patterson, illuminating all the motionless world of time between, peyote solidities of halls, backyard green tree cemetery dawns, wine drunkenness over the rooftops, storefront burrows of tea head, joyride, neon blinking traffic light, sun and moon and tree vibrations, and the roaring winter dusks of Brooklyn, ash can rantings and kind king light of mind, who chained themselves to subways for the endless ride from Battery to Holy Bronx on Benzedrine until the noise of wheels and children brought them down, shuddering, mouth racked and battered, bleak of brain, all drained of brilliance in the drear light of zoo, who sank all night in submarine light of Bickfords, floated out and sat through the stale beer afternoon in desolate fugazis, listening to the crack of doom on the hydrogen jukebox, who talked continuously 70 hours from Park to Bad to Bar to Bellevue to the Brooklyn Bridge, a lost battalion of platonic conversationalists jumping down the stoops, off fire escapes, off windowsills, off Empire State, out of the moon, yakety-yakking, screaming, vomiting, whispering facts and memories and anecdotes and eyeball kicks and shocks of hospitals and jails and wars, whole intellects disgorged in total recall for 7 days and nights, with brilliant eyes, meet for the synagogue, cast on the pavement, who vanished into nowhere Zen, New Jersey, leaving a trail of ambiguous picture postcards of Atlantic City Hall, suffering eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings, and migraines of China under junk withdrawal in New York's bleak furnished room, who wandered around and around at midnight in the railroad yard, wondering where to go and went, leaving no broken hearts, who lit cigarettes in boxcars, racketing through snow toward lonesome farms in Grandfather Night, who studied Plotinus, Poe, St. John of the Cross, telepathy, and Bop Kabbalah because the cosmos instinctively vibrated at their feet in Kansas, who loaned it through the streets of Idaho seeking visionary Indian angels who were visionary Indian angels, who thought they were only mad when Baltimore gleamed in supernatural ecstasy, who jumped in limousines with the Chinamen of Oklahoma on the impulse of winter midnight streetlight small town rain, who lounged hungry and lonesome through Houston seeking jazz or sex or soup, and followed the brilliant Spaniard to converse about America and eternity, a hopeless task, and so took ship to Africa, who disappeared into the volcanoes of Mexico, leaving behind nothing but the shadow of dungarees and the lava and ash and poetry scattered in fireplace Chicago, who reappeared on the West Coast investigating the FBI in beards and shorts with big pacifist eyes, sexy in their dark skin, passing out incomprehensible leaflets, who burned cigarette holes in their arms, protesting the narcotic tobacco haze of capitalism, who distributed super communist pamphlets in Union Square, weeping and undressing while the sirens of Los Alamos wailed them down and wailed down Wall, and the Staten Island ferry also wailed, who broke down crying in white gymnasiums, naked and trembling before the machinery of other skeletons, who bit detectives in the neck and shrieked with delight in police cars for committing no crime but their own wild cooking, pederasty, and intoxication, who howled on their knees in subways and were dragged off the roof waving genitals and manuscripts, who let themselves be fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy, who blew and were blown by those human seraphim, the sailor caresses of Atlantic and Caribbean love, who bawled in the morning, in the evenings, in rose gardens, and then the grass of public parks and cemeteries, scattering their semen freely to whomever, come who may, who hiccuped endlessly trying to giggle but wound up with a sob behind a partition in a Turkish bath when the blonde and naked angel came to pierce them with a sword, who lost their love boys to the three old shrews of fate, the one-eyed shrew of the heterosexual dollar, the one-eyed shrew that winks out of the womb, and the one-eyed shrew that does nothing but sit on her ass and snip the intellectual golden threads of the craftsman's loom, who copulated ecstatic and insatiate with a bottle of beer, a sweetheart, a package of cigarettes, a candle, and fell off the bed and continued along the floor and down the hall and ended fainting on the wall with a vision of ultimate cunt and cum eluding the last jism of consciousness, who sweetened the snatches of a million girls trembling in the sunset and were red-eyed in the morning but prepared to sweeten the snatch of the sunrise, flashing buttocks under barns and naked in the lake, who went out whoring through Colorado in myriad stolen night cars, Neil Cassidy, secret hero of these poems, coxman and Adonis of Denver, joy to the memory of his innumerable lays of girls in empty lots and diner backyards, movie houses, rickety rows on mountain tops, in caves with gaunt waitresses, and familiar roadside lonely petticoat upliftings, and especially secret gas station solipsisms of John's and hometown alleys too, who faded out in vast sordid movies, were shifted in dreams, woke on a sudden Manhattan, and picked themselves up out of basements hung over with heartless tokay and horrors of Third Avenue iron dreams, and stumbled to unemployment offices, who walked all night with their shoes full of blood on the snowbank docks waiting for a door in the East River to open to a room full of steam heat and opium, who created great suicidal dramas on the apartment cliff banks of the Hudson under the wartime blue floodlight of the moon, and their heads shall be crowned with laurel and oblivion, who ate the lamb stew of the imagination or digested the crab at the muddy bottom of the rivers of Bowery, who wept at the romance of the streets with their pushcarts full of onions and bad music, who sat in boxes breathing in the darkness under the bridge and rose up to build harpsichords in their lofts, who coughed on the sixth floor of Harlem crowned with flame under the tubercular sky surrounded by orange crates of theology, who scribbled all night rocking and rolling over lofty incantations which in the yellow morning were stanzas of gibberish, who cooked rotten animals, lung, heart, feet, tail, borscht, and tortillas, dreaming of the pure vegetable kingdom, who plunged themselves under meat trucks looking for an egg, who threw their watches off the roof to cast their ballot for eternity outside of time, and alarm clocks fell on their head every day for the next decade, who cut their wrists 3 times successively, unsuccessfully, gave up, and were forced to open antique stores where they thought they were growing old and cried, who were burned alive in their innocent flannel suits on Madison Avenue amid the blasts of leaden verse and the tanked-up clatter of the iron regiments of fashion and the nitroglycerin shrieks of the fairies of advertising and the mustard gas of sinister intelligent editors, or were run down by the drunken taxicabs of absolute reality, who jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, this actually happened, and walked away unknown and forgotten into the ghostly days of Chinatown soup alleyways and fire trucks, not even one free beer, who sang out of their windows in despair and fell into the subway window, jumped off the filthy Passaic, leaped on Negroes, cried all over the street, danced on broken wine glass, barefoot, smashed phonograph records of nostalgic European 1930s German jazz, finished the whiskey and threw up groaning into the bloody toilet, moans in their ears and the blast of colossal steam whistles, who barreled down the highways of the past, journeying to each other's hot rod Golgotha jail solitude watch or Birmingham jazz incarnation, who drove cross country 72 hours to find out if I had a vision or you had a vision or he had a vision to find out eternity, who journeyed to Denver, who died in Denver, who came back to Denver and waited in vain, who watched over Denver and brooded and loaned in Denver and finally went away to find out the time, and now Denver is lonesome for her heroes, who fell on her knees in hopeless cathedrals for each other's salvation and light and breast until the soul illuminated its hair for a second, who crashed through their minds in jail waiting for impossible criminals with golden heads and the charm of reality in their hearts, who sang sweet blues to Alcatraz, who retired to Mexico to cultivate a habit, or Rocky Mount to tender Buddha, or Tangiers to boys, or Southern Pacific to the black locomotive, or Harvard to Narcissus, to Woodlawn to daisy chain or grave, who demanded sanity trials, accusing the radio of hypnotism, and were left with their insanity in their hands and a hung jury, who threw potato salad at CCNY lecturers on Dadaism and subsequently presented themselves on the granite steps of the madhouse with shaven heads and harlequin speech demanding instantaneous lobotomy, who were given instead the concrete void of insulin, Metrosol, electricity, hydrotherapy, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, ping pong, and amnesia, who in humorless protest overturned only one symbolic ping pong table, resting briefly in catatonia, returning years later truly bald except for a wig of blood and tears and fingers to the visible madman doom of the wards of the mad towns of the East, pilgrim states, rocklands, and greystones, fetid halls, bickering with the echoes of the soul, rocking and rolling in the midnight solitude bench, dolem realms of love, dream of life, a nightmare, bodies turned to stone as heavy as the moon, with mother finally and the last fantastic book flung out of the tenement window, and the last door closed at 4 a.m., and the last telephone slammed at the wall in reply, and the last furnished room emptied down to the last piece of mental furniture, a yellow paper rose twisted on a wire hanger in the closet, and even that imaginary, nothing but a hopeful little bit of hallucination. Ah, Carl, while you are not safe, I am not safe. And now you're really in the total animal soup of time. And who, therefore, ran through the icy streets obsessed with a sudden flash of the alchemy of the use of the ellipse, the catalog, the meter, the vibrating plane, who dreamt and made incarnate gaps in time and space through images juxtaposed and trapped the archangel of the soul between two visual images and joined the elemental verbs and set the noun and dash of consciousness together, jumping with sensation of pater omnipotens aeterno deus, to recreate the syntax and measure of poor human prose, and stand before you speechless and intelligent and shaking with shame, rejected yet confessing out the soul to conform to the rhythm of thought in his naked and endless head. The madman, bum, and angel beat in time, unknown, yet putting down here what might be left to say in time come after death, and rose reincarnate, and the ghostly close of jazz, and the gold-horned shadow of the band, and blew the suffering of America's naked mind for love into an ele ele lama lama sabachthani saxophone cry that shivered the cities down to the last radio, with the absolute heart of the poem of life butchered out of their own bodies, good to eat 1,000 years. Part 2. What sphinx of cement and aluminum bashed open their skulls and ate up their brains and imagination? Moloch, solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans and unobtainable dollars, children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy judger of men, Moloch the incomprehensible prison, Moloch the cross-bone, soulless jailhouse and congress of sorrows, Moloch whose buildings are judgment, Moloch the vast stone of war, Moloch the stunned governments, Moloch whose mind is pure machinery, Moloch whose blood is running money, Moloch whose fingers are 10 armies, Moloch whose breast is a cannibal dynamo, Moloch whose ear is a smoking tomb, Moloch whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows, Moloch whose skyscrapers stand in the streets like endless Jehovahs, Moloch whose factories dream and croak in the fog, Moloch whose smokestacks and antennae crown the cities, Moloch whose love is endless oil and stone, Moloch whose soul is electricity and banks, Moloch the poverty is the specter of genius, Moloch fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen, Moloch whose name is the mind, Moloch in whom I sit lonely, Moloch in whom I dream angels, crazy in Moloch, cocksucker in Moloch, lack love and manless and Moloch, Moloch who entered my soul early, Moloch in who I am a consciousness without a body, Moloch who frightened me out of my natural ecstasy, Moloch whom I abandon. Wake up in Moloch, light streaming out of the sky. Moloch, Moloch, robot apartments, invisible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, demonic industries, spectral nations, invincible madhouses, granite cocks, monstrous bombs. They broke their backs lifting Moloch to heaven. Pavements, trees, radios, tons, lifting the city to heaven which exists and is everywhere about us. Visions, omens, hallucinations, miracles, ecstasies, gone down the American River. Dreams, adorations, illuminations, religions, the whole boatload of sensitive bullshit. Breakthroughs over the river, flips and crucifixions, gone down the flood, highs, epiphanies, despairs, 10 years, animal screams and suicides, minds, new loves, mad generation, down on the rocks of time. Real holy laughter in the river. They saw it all. The wild eyes, the holy yells. They bade farewell. They jumped off the roof to solitude, waving, carrying flowers, down to the river, into the street. Part 3. Carl Solomon. I am with you in Rockland where you're madder than I am. I'm with you in Rockland where you must feel very strange. I'm with you in Rockland where you imitate the shade of my mother. I'm with you in Rockland where you've murdered your 12 secretaries. I'm with you in Rockland where you laugh at this invisible humor. I'm with you in Rockland where we are great writers on the same dreadful typewriter. I'm with you in Rockland where your condition has become serious and is reported on the radio. I'm with you in Rockland where the faculties of the skull no longer admit the worms of the senses. I'm with you in Rockland where you drink the tea of the breast of the spinsters of Utica. I'm with you in Rockland where you pun on the bodies of your nurses, the harpies of the Bronx. I'm with you in Rockland where you scream in a straitjacket that you're losing the game of the actual ping pong of the abyss. I'm with you in Rockland where you bang on the catatonic piano. The soul is innocent and immortal. It should never die ungodly in an armed madhouse. I'm with you in Rockland where 50 more shocks will never return your soul to its body again from a pilgrimage to a cross in the void. I'm with you in Rockland where you accuse your doctors of insanity and plot the Hebrew socialist revolution against the fascist national Golgotha. I'm with you in Rockland where we will split the heavens of Long Island and resurrect your living human Jesus from the superhuman tomb. I'm with you in Rockland where 25,000 mad comrades are together singing the final stanzas of the Internationale. I'm with you in Rockland where we hug and kiss the United States under our bedsheets, the United States that coughs all night and won't let us sleep. I'm with you in Rockland where we wake up electrified out of the coma of our own souls, airplanes roaring over the roof. They've come to drop angelic bombs. The hospital illuminates itself. Imagery, walls collapse. Oh, skinny legions run outside. Oh, starry spangled shock of mercy. The eternal war is here. Oh, victory, forget your underwear. We're free. I'm with you in Rockland. In my dreams, you walk dripping from a sea journey on a highway across America in tears to the door of my cottage in the western night. San Francisco, 1955 to 1966. So that is Allen Ginsberg's famous Howl, the poem he's most well known for, and maybe the single most historically significant piece of art of the 20th century. And it's a controversial poem. Some people to this day still cite it as hot garbage. Other people think it's pure genius. But I think to understand it a little better, it helps to have the historical context. So like I said before, Howl was written in 1955, published in 1956, and it was written in a time of post-war conformity. So the culture had gotten a little too buttoned up. People weren't able to speak their mind. People weren't able to express themselves in a way that was liberating. So Ginsberg really just was feeling the pressure of that. I mean, in the opening line, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. So it's an outcry. He's speaking up for all the outsiders and people who are marginalized by the culture at the time. Those alienated intellectuals, the artists, the queer people like himself. There's no room to even have discussions about this in his time, and hence his frustration. And the poem itself, it doesn't stick to any traditional verse. It's completely free verse. In fact, it's heavily inspired by jazz music. So, like the rhythmic nature of it and the spontaneity of it, that is all inspired by jazz musicians. And for that reason, too, Howell, you can't just read the words on a page. You have to listen to it read aloud or read it aloud yourself to really understand it. It's meant to be embodied. It's meant to be an outcry. It's a howl. And yeah, in 1957, it was actually famously the subject of an obscenity trial, which was a big free speech moment, freedom of expression moment in the United States. Obviously, the case was dropped, but yeah, people thought he was trying to be a shock jock or just be obscene for the sake of being obscene, but obviously that wasn't it at all for Ginsberg. He was genuinely sharing how he felt at the time, and it's this act of radical openness, just letting people peer inside his kind of twisted mind. Like all of us at times have a kind of twisted mind, and there's horrifying things in there, and there's beautiful things in there, and Howell exemplifies all of that. Yeah, and Ginsberg, he was an activist, and he's not without controversy. I don't think he's a perfect person at all. I don't think if you I won't go into it here, but if you look into him a little more, there are some very, very, very wild points of view of his, and yeah, he's a really controversial guy, but he was what we needed to push the cultural envelope, and Howell was the piece of art to do that, like powerful art does. It pushes the cultural envelope. And the legacy of Howell, it remains one of the most celebrated poems of all time. It's raw, it's powerful, it's emotional, and it was really innovative at the time for the use of language, this stream of consciousness style, and its unflinching critique of modern civilization. So its impact, it continues to resonate in discussions about artistic freedom and societal norms, and the role of literature in challenging the status quo. So overall, Howell, it's not just a poem, it really is a cultural milestone. It's a vivid outcry against the conformist society and an enduring call for personal and artistic liberation. And like I said, this poem really kicked off the 1960s. So, he won that trial, or the trial was dropped in 1957, and 1960, the ball got rolling in this direction of freedom of expression like never before, and that kind of started this modern into postmodern back and forth we've seen. So the 60s, things really opened up, freedom of expression, drugs, sex, rock and roll. 70s, things got really buttoned up again, and then into the 80s, Reagan's war on drugs, and then now we're kind of coming back into this open space where marijuana is legalized, psychedelics are being legalized again, but now people maybe feel that was going too far with I don't know. I'll let you draw the connections you want to our current political climate and how the pendulum has kind of been swinging back and forth, and hopefully, I think, slowly coming to some sort of center. But yeah, Howell, no doubt, was one of the things that kicked off this cultural discussion of, just how much do we let culture define human nature, or can we open up our eyes to a broader perspective and realize that, culture itself is defined by human nature, or culture is nested within human nature. Human nature does not exist inside of culture. I think that's one of Ginsberg's central points. And I'll leave you with this quote from Ginsberg. So he says, "Poetry is the one place where people can speak their original human mind. It is the outlet for people to say in public what is known in private." So I think, it was Howell, it's almost in a way generous of Ginsberg to be so open, to share this outcry, and to be so transparent about what his thoughts do and where the places that his mind goes, and yeah, it's a powerful piece of poetry, and I find it fascinating. I hope you found this video interesting. If you want to see more content like this, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.